The morning sun cast long shadows between the sleek skyscrapers of Silicon Valley, where success stories were as common as coffee shops on every corner. Yet among the crowds of ambitious entrepreneurs and tech wizards rushing to their next meetings, one figure stood out, a young woman whose silence spoke louder than words. Sarah Chen stood at the corner of University Avenue in Palo Alto, holding a worn cardboard sign and a weathered notebook. Her expressive dark eyes caught the attention of passers-by, some of whom would pause briefly before continuing their hurried pace. Unlike the countless others seeking fortune in the tech capital of the world, Sarah wasn't asking for money. Her sign read, "Computer programmer seeking opportunity, will code for food." The irony wasn't lost on those who took the time to stop. Here, in the heart of the world's technology hub, a skilled programmer had ended up on the streets. But Sarah's story was far more complex than anyone could guess from just a glance. Unable to speak since a traumatic incident she could barely remember, Sarah communicated through elegant hand gestures and by writing in her notebook. Her fingers, though weathered from months of hardship, still moved with the grace of someone who could make a keyboard sing with complex algorithms and elegant code. Each day, she positioned herself strategically near the headquarters of major tech companies, hoping her unconventional approach might catch the right person's attention. Some days, kind souls would bring her coffee or a sandwich. Others would stop to chat, intrigued by the codes and algorithms she would sketch in her notebook to prove her capabilities. Everything changed on a crisp autumn morning when Alexander Wagner's Tesla rolled to a stop at the red light where Sarah stood. Esmati, the CEO of Wagner Tech, one of Silicon Valley's fastest-growing AI companies, Alexander had seen his share of unusual recruitment tactics. But something about the quiet dignity in Sarah's stance and the complexity of the code visible in her open notebook made him pause. Instead of simply driving on when the light turned green, Alexander pulled into a nearby parking spot. His security detail protested, but he waved them off. There was something about this woman that didn't fit the usual narrative of Silicon Valley's unfortunate souls. Sarah's eyes widened with recognition as he approached. Even without speaking, she managed to convey both respect and determination. She quickly flipped to a clean page in her notebook and wrote with steady hands, "Mr. Wagner, I've developed an AI algorithm that could revolutionize assistive technology." Alexander raised an eyebrow, intrigued not just by her claim, but by the confidence with which she made it, despite her circumstances. He'd received countless pitches from well-funded startups and prestigious universities, but never one quite like this. "Show me," he said simply, gesturing to her notebook. For the next 15 minutes, Sarah's hands flew across the pages, sketching out complex flowcharts and equations. Alexander watched, his expression shifting from curiosity to genuine interest as he recognized the innovation in her approach. This wasn't just another algorithm, it was a completely new way of thinking about human-computer interaction. What struck him most wasn't just the brilliance of her code, but the way she had clearly designed it with accessibility in mind. Every aspect of her algorithm seemed crafted to bridge the gap between technology and human limitation, as if she intimately understood the challenges faced by those who couldn't interact with computers in traditional ways. As the morning crowd streamed around them, Alexander made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his business card and wrote on the back, "Come to Wagner Tech tomorrow at 9 a.m. Security will be expecting you." Sarah took the card with trembling fingers, her eyes filling with tears of gratitude. But Alexander wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call to his assistant. "Clara, yes, I need you to book a hotel room immediately. And send someone to take Ms." He paused, looking at Sarah questioningly. She quickly wrote Sarah Chen in her notebook. "Ms. Sarah Chen shopping for appropriate business attire. Put it all on my personal account." He turned back to Sarah. "Consider this an investment in your potential. Tomorrow you show me everything about this algorithm of yours." As his security detail finally convinced him to leave, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Sarah Chen than met the eye. Something about her carried the polish of a different life, a hint of refinement that her current circumstances couldn't completely hide. What he didn't know was that this chance encounter would unravel a mystery that had haunted Silicon Valley's elite circles for years, and that the silent woman with the brilliant mind would turn his world upside down in ways he could never imagine. The next morning, Sarah stood in front of the mirror in her hotel room, barely recognizing herself. The personal shopper Alexander had sent had done an impressive job. The tailored navy suit and silk blouse transformed her from a street survivor into the professional she'd once been. Her long black hair, freshly washed and styled, framed a face that looked younger now that it was free from worry about where she would sleep that night. But it was her eyes that held her attention. For the first time in months, they sparkled with hope instead of desperation. She touched her throat, gently, remembering a time when her voice had flowed as freely as her code now did. The doctors had called it psychogenic mutism, a response to trauma so severe that her mind had simply shut down her ability to speak. Sometimes in her dreams, she could still hear herself screaming. At precisely 8:45 a.m., Sarah walked into the gleaming lobby of Wagner-Tech's headquarters. The security guard, already briefed about her arrival, didn't bat an eye at her notebook communication method. Instead, he handed her a visitor's badge and directed her to the executive elevator with a friendly smile. Alexander was waiting in his office, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Silicon Valley. He wasn't alone. A woman who introduced herself as Dr. Emily Rodriguez, Wagner-Tech's head of AI research, sat beside him. "Show us." "Everything," Alexander said simply, gesturing to the large touchscreen display on the wall. For the next 2 hours, Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing her creation to life. She had developed a revolutionary neural interface that could translate thoughts into text and commands, requiring minimal physical input. It wasn't just another assistive technology. It was a bridge between the mind and the digital world. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward, her excitement palpable. "This is incredible," she breathed. "The application potential goes far beyond accessibility. This could change the entire paradigm of human-computer interaction." Alexander watched Sarah's face as she demonstrated her work. There was something familiar about her mannerisms, the way she carried herself. It nagged at the edges of his memory, but he couldn't quite place it. Using her notebook, Sarah explained how she'd developed the algorithm while living on the streets, coding on a laptop she'd kept carefully hidden and charged at public libraries. But when Dr. Rodriguez asked about her background, Sarah's hands trembled slightly before writing, "Computer science degree. Former programmer." Alexander caught the hesitation. "Where did you study?" he asked gently. Sarah's pen hovered over the notebook for a moment before she wrote, "I'm sorry, but I can't discuss my past. Please understand." Something in her eyes, fear perhaps or deep sadness, made Alexander change the subject. Instead, he focused on her innovation, asking detailed questions about implementation and scalability. By lunchtime, the decision was made. Alexander offered her not just a job, but a position as project lead for what he was already calling the Bridge Initiative. The salary he proposed made Sarah's eyes widen, but it was the dedicated team and resources he promised that brought tears to her eyes. As she signed the employment contracts, Alexander noticed something else, her signature. It was practiced, refined, the kind of signature that came from years of signing important documents. Not the signature of someone who had simply fallen on hard times. "One more thing," he said as she prepared to leave. "I'm assigning you a personal assistant who knows sign language. Your brilliance shouldn't be limited by having to write everything down." Sarah's grateful smile lit up the room, but as she turned to leave, Alexander's eye caught something else, a small birthmark behind her right ear, partially hidden by her hair. His breath caught in his throat as a memory stirred. 5 years ago at a tech conference in Boston, he'd met James Chen, the legendary founder of Chen Tech. Chen had brought his daughter to the conference, a brilliant young programmer who had been working on revolutionary AI interfaces. Days later, the Chen family had disappeared mysteriously, their company falling into chaos before being sold off in pieces. The daughter's name had been Sarah. As the door closed behind her, Alexander picked up his phone, then set it down again. No, he needed to handle this carefully. If this Sarah Chen was the same woman, there had to be a reason she was hiding her identity. And if she was, what had happened to make her lose both her voice and her fortune? What Alexander didn't know was that across town, in a luxurious penthouse office, a phone was ringing. "Sir," a voice reported, "we've found her. Sarah Chen has surfaced at Wagner Tech." The man behind the desk smiled. After 5 years of searching, the final piece of his plan was falling into place. "Perfect," he said softly. "Now we can begin." Sarah's first month at Wagner Tech passed in a whirlwind of creativity and innovation. Her team, handpicked by Alexander, quickly adapted to her unique communication style. Her personal assistant, Lisa Martinez, became not just a translator, but a friend, her fluid sign language bringing Sarah's brilliant ideas to life in team meetings. The Bridge initiative grew beyond anyone's expectations. Sarah's neural interface prototype was already showing remarkable results in preliminary tests, but success brought visibility and visibility brought risk. Each time a tech blog mentioned the mysterious new project lead at Wagner Tech, Sarah's hands would tremble slightly before returning to their confident dance across the keyboard. Alexander watched her transformation with mixed emotions. The brilliant, confident programmer was a far cry from the woman he'd met on the street, but there was still something guarded in her eyes. Every time he thought about confronting her about her true identity, something held him back. Instead, he found himself spending more time in her lab, ostensibly checking on the project's progress. One evening, as the Silicon Valley sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Alexander found Sarah alone in her lab, completely absorbed in her work. She didn't notice him at first, and he took a moment to observe her. The way she carried herself, the elegant efficiency of her movements, everything screamed old money and refined upbringing. "Sarah," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, and for a moment her guard was down. The look in her eyes made his heart skip a beat. Using sign language, which he'd been secretly learning, he asked, "Would you have dinner with me tonight?" Surprise flickered across her face, followed by something that looked like fear. She hesitated, then signed back, "As my boss?" "As Alexander," he replied, his hands forming the signs carefully. "Just Alexander." Her acceptance came with a brilliant smile that transformed her entire face. An hour later, they sat in a private room at Alexander's favorite restaurant, the city lights twinkling below them through floor-to-ceiling windows. Over dinner, they communicated through a combination of sign language, written notes, and the simple understanding that had grown between them. Sarah's eyes danced with humor as Alexander told stories about his early days in tech, and he found himself captivated by the grace with which she expressed herself without words. But as the evening progressed, Alexander noticed something else. Every time the restaurant door opened, Sarah's eyes would flick toward it, her body tensing slightly before relaxing again. She was watching, always watching, like someone who knew they were being hunted. His suspicions were confirmed when they left the restaurant. A black SUV was parked across the street, its engine running. The moment Sarah saw it, she froze, her face draining of color. Alexander immediately guided her back inside, signaling his security team. In the safety of the restaurant's private room, Sarah's hands shook as she wrote in her notebook, "I'm sorry. I should go. I'm putting you in danger." Alexander caught her hands in his. "Sarah," he said softly, "I know who you are." Her eyes widened in panic, but he continued, "You're Sarah Chen, daughter of James Chen, founder of Chen Tech. You disappeared 5 years ago along with your entire family." Tears filled her eyes as she slowly nodded. Her hands moved to sign but trembled too much to form the words. Instead, she wrote, "How long have you known?" "I suspected since that first day in my office. The birthmark behind your ear. I remembered it from the tech conference in Boston. Your father was so proud of you, couldn't stop talking about your AI research." Sarah's tears fell freely now. She wrote, "They're still looking for me. I can't tell you everything. It would put you in danger. But that night when everything happened, I lost more than my voice. I lost everything I thought I knew about my family's company, about who we were." Alexander's security team interrupted them, confirming that the SUV had disappeared. But as Alexander looked at Sarah's frightened face, he made a decision that would change everything. "Come home with me," he said. "My house has the best security system in Silicon Valley. We'll figure this out together." What he didn't say was that he'd already started his own investigation into the Chen family's disappearance, that his private investigators had uncovered disturbing connections between Chentech's collapse and several major tech companies, including one run by his own father's oldest friend. As they drove through the night in Alexander's bulletproof Tesla, Sarah rested her head against the window, her reflection fragmented by raindrops that had begun to fall. She pulled out her notebook one more time and wrote something that made Alexander's heart clench. "The program I'm developing, it's not just for helping people communicate. It's the key to uncovering the truth. But I need your help." Alexander reached over and squeezed her hand, not knowing that at that very moment, in a mansion overlooking the Pacific, his father was receiving a phone call that would shatter everything they were building. Richard Wagner sat in his study, the phone call he'd just received echoing in his mind. The voice had been familiar, too familiar. "Your son is harboring Sarah Chen. You remember our agreement, Richard. Handle this or we will." His hands shook as he poured himself a drink. The past he'd tried so hard to bury was rushing back like a tidal wave. James Chen's face flashed in his memory. His old friend, his partner in their early days. The night. Everything had gone wrong when secrets and lies had torn their world apart. Meanwhile, in Alexander's modernist mansion in the hills, Sarah sat curled in an oversized armchair, her notebook open but untouched. Alexander watched her from across the room, giving her space while his security team swept the grounds. Finally, she began to write, her words flowing faster than he'd ever seen. "The neural interface I'm developing, it's based on my father's original research. He discovered something, Alexander, something that made powerful people very nervous. The night we disappeared, he tried to transfer everything to a secure server, but they were already there. I got away, but the trauma, seeing what happened, my voice just stopped." Alexander moved to sit beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. "What did he discover, Sarah?" Her hand trembled as she wrote, "An AI consciousness algorithm that could think independently, truly independently. But more than that, it could detect deception at a neural level. Imagine it integrated into communication systems, financial networks, security protocols. No one could lie. No one could hide." The implications hit Alexander like a physical force. Such technology would reshape society itself. Every corporation, every government agency, every power structure would be affected. Sarah continued writing. "The prototype was hidden in my father's last gift to me, a quantum-encrypted drive disguised as a simple locket. I've spent 5 years developing the interface that could unlock it. That's what the Bridge Initiative really is, Alexander. Not just an assistive technology, but a bridge to the truth." He should have been angry at the deception, but all he felt was awe at her courage and determination. "Where is the locket now?" he asked. "Hidden. Safe," she wrote. "But I need Wagnertech's quantum computing resources to complete the interface. That's why I had to find you. Your company was the only one with both the technology and a CEO I thought I could trust." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them. Alexander reached out, gently touching her face. Sarah leaned into his hand, her eyes closing briefly. But their moment was interrupted by an urgent message on Alexander's phone. His face paled as he read it. "Sarah," he said, his voice tight with concern, "my father is coming here now." The panic in her eyes was immediate, but Alexander held her shoulders gently. "Listen to me," he said, signing as he spoke. "I won't let anything happen to you. But we need to understand what he knows. Will you trust me?" Sarah's hands moved in a fluid gesture. "I already do." Within minutes, Richard Wagner's Bentley pulled up to the house. Alexander positioned Sarah in his home office, hidden from immediate view but able to hear everything through the open door. His father burst in, looking more agitated than Alexander had ever seen him. Son, Richard began, his voice strained, you need to end this project. The Bridge Initiative. It's more complicated than you know. Because of Sarah Chen? Alexander asked calmly, watching his father's face pale. Or because of what happened to her family? You don't understand the forces you're dealing with, Richard pleaded. Some secrets need to stay buried. Like your involvement in what happened that night? Alexander's voice was steel now. Did you know what they were going to do to your friend's family? Richard sank into a chair, suddenly looking old and tired. James was going to expose everything. Decades of corporate manipulation, technological suppression, deals that kept the power in the hands of a few. His AI would have destroyed it all. We tried to reason with him. The sound of something falling came from the office. Sarah stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face as she looked at Richard. Her hands moved in sharp, angry gestures that Alexander translated. You were there that night. You watched it happen. You were my father's best friend. Richard's face crumpled. Sarah, I never meant... They weren't supposed to hurt anyone. It was just supposed to be a seizure of assets, of research. But it went wrong, so wrong. Sarah's next signs were slow, deliberate. My father trusted you. I watched them take everything from us, and you stood there. My voice stopped because I screamed so long for help that never came. Alexander moved to stand between them, his mind racing. Everything was connected. His father, the Chen family's disappearance, Sarah's brilliant algorithm, and somewhere in the shadows, people powerful enough to make an entire family vanish. But as he looked at Sarah's determined face, he knew they had one advantage their enemies didn't expect. They had the truth, they had each other, and most importantly, they had nothing left to lose. The following weeks at Wagner Tech became a delicate dance of truth and secrets. During the day, Sarah and Alexander maintained their professional relationship, but their shared glances held volumes of unspoken understanding. The Bridge Initiative continued to progress rapidly, with Sarah's team achieving breakthrough after breakthrough in neural interface technology. But it was during their evenings together that the real work happened. In the secure confines of Alexander's home lab, they worked tirelessly to unlock the quantum-encrypted drive hidden in Sarah's locket. Their time together had become precious, filled with both intense focus on their mission and moments of unexpected tenderness. One evening, as Sarah was explaining a particularly complex piece of code, Alexander found himself more focused on her hands than her explanation. The grace with which she moved them, whether signing or typing, had become mesmerizing to him. She noticed his distraction and paused, raising an eyebrow questioningly. Sorry, he signed, having become nearly fluent in sign language. Sometimes I forget to listen because I'm too busy watching you exist. A blush crept across her cheeks, and she playfully threw a crumpled piece of paper at him. But then her expression grew serious, and she began to sign. Why aren't you afraid of all? This? The people we're up against. They're powerful enough to make my entire family disappear. They could destroy everything you've built. Alexander moved closer to her, taking her hands in his. Because some things are worth the risk, he said softly. You're worth the risk. Their moment was interrupted by Dr. Rodriguez, who had become their closest ally at Wagner Tech. She burst into the lab, her face flushed with excitement. We did it, she exclaimed. The neural interface just passed all preliminary clinical trials. The FDA fast-tracked our application. We can begin human testing next week. Sarah's eyes widened. This was happening faster than they'd anticipated. She quickly signed to Alexander. We need more time. The quantum decryption isn't complete yet. But they both knew they couldn't slow down the project without raising suspicions. The Bridge Initiative had caught the attention of the tech world, and investors were clamoring for results. They had to maintain their cover while racing against time to unlock the truth hidden in Sarah's locket. That night, over dinner in Alexander's kitchen, they strategized their next moves. Sarah had begun to experience something new, moments when her throat would tingle, and she could almost feel words forming. Her trauma-induced mutism was showing signs of healing, though she kept this development to herself, not quite ready to trust her voice again. Alexander noticed her touching her throat. Are you okay? He signed, concern evident in his face. She nodded, then wrote in her notebook, "I think being with you is helping me heal. But Alexander, there's something else you need to know. The night everything happened, I overheard something about a project called Silicon Crown. Your father mentioned it when he thought I couldn't hear. I think it's connected to why they wanted my father's research." Alexander's expression darkened. The name Silicon Crown had appeared in some of his private investigations, always connected to a shadow group of tech industry leaders who seemed to operate above the law. He'd even found hints that his own company's early funding might have come from this group, though he'd never been able to prove it. Their planning session was interrupted by an alert from Alexander's security system. Someone had just accessed Wagnertech's main server using his father's credentials, downloading files related to the Bridge Initiative. "He's trying to find out how close we are," Alexander said grimly. "We need to accelerate our timeline." Sarah's hands flew as she signed, "Then we need to take a risk. The quantum decryption might work faster if we integrate it directly with the neural interface prototype. It's dangerous. If anyone traces the processing power we're using, they'll know we're not just developing assistive technology." Alexander caught her hands, holding them still. "It's not just dangerous for the project," he said softly. "The neural interface connects directly to the user's brain patterns. If something goes wrong during decryption..." Sarah's expression was determined. As she signed, "I'll do it. It's my father's research, my fight." "Our fight," Alexander corrected her, signing back, "and I won't let you take that risk alone. We'll test it on both of us." As they sat there, hands intertwined, Sarah felt that familiar tingling in her throat. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she could speak. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed Alexander, letting her actions say what her voice couldn't. Behind them, the lab computers continued their relentless work on the quantum decryption, their screens reflecting lines of code that might change the world or destroy everything they had built. And somewhere in Silicon Valley, a group of powerful people were meeting, their discussions centered on one topic: how to stop what was coming before it was too late. What none of them knew was that Sarah had built a backdoor into the neural interface, one that would activate only under specific conditions. As she kissed Alexander, her heart racing with both love and fear, she prayed she would never have to use it. But if she did, it would change everything, not just for them, but for the entire tech industry's power structure. The morning of the neural interface's first human trial dawned clear and bright over Silicon Valley. The Wagnertech labs were buzzing with excitement, camera crews setting up in the observation room while medical teams ran through their final checks. Dr. Rodriguez had arranged for a small group of carefully selected patients with various communication disabilities to be the first test subjects. But before any of them would try the interface, Sarah and Alexander had their own private trial planned. They had arrived hours before dawn, using Alexander's private access codes to enter the secure testing facility. The neural interface prototype sat ready, connected to their quantum decryption program, while Sarah's locket lay open beside it. "Are you sure about this?" Alexander signed, his movements containing a slight tremor that betrayed his anxiety. Sarah nodded, her eyes clear and determined. She wrote quickly in her notebook, "The interface needs to map both our neural patterns. Your father's involvement means you might have subconscious memories that could help decode the encryption. And I need to face my own memories of that night." As they prepared the equipment, Sarah's hands moved in a blur of signs. "Alexander, if something goes wrong, if they realize what we're doing, you need to be ready to disconnect everything. The backdoor program I installed will activate if my neural patterns show extreme distress. It will transfer everything to a secure server and then wipe all local data." Alexander caught her hands, bringing them to his lips. "Nothing will go wrong," he promised, though they both knew it was a promise he couldn't guarantee. The interface itself was deceptively simple, 2 sleek headbands studded with sensors that would read their neural patterns. As they put them on, Sarah's hands trembled slightly. Alexander reached out and squeezed her hand, a gesture that had become their private language of reassurance. Dr. Rodriguez arrived just as they were finishing the setup, earlier than expected. Her eyes widened at seeing them both wearing the interfaces, but she quickly understood. "I'll monitor your vital signs," she said. moving to the control station. But please be careful. We haven't tested dual synchronization yet. The first few minutes were anticlimactic. The interface mapped their brain patterns, creating beautiful visualizations on the screens around them. Sarah could feel a slight tingling sensation as the system synchronized with her neural pathways. Then Alexander's patterns appeared, interweaving, with hers in complex patterns. Suddenly, the quantum decryption program sprang to life. Numbers and symbols cascaded across the screens as it began processing the encrypted data from Sarah's locket. Sarah's eyes widened as she recognized fragments of her father's research appearing in the data stream. But something else was happening. As the neural interface deepened its connection, memories began to surface. Not just Sarah's, but Alexander's, too. They found themselves sharing flashes of the past. Sarah seeing her father working late in his lab, Alexander overhearing heated arguments between his father and other executives, fragments of conversations about Project Silicon Crown. Then, Sarah's memories of that fateful night began to emerge. The neural interface translated her trauma into data patterns, and suddenly Alexander could see it too. Men in dark suits entering the Chen family compound, his own father among them. He felt Sarah's fear, her confusion, the moment her voice had been frozen by terror. But there was something else in the memory, something she hadn't been able to access before. As she'd hidden in her father's lab, she'd seen him typing frantically at his computer. Now, with the neural interface enhancing her recall, she could see the code he'd been writing, a final message hidden within the encryption. Sarah's hands flew to the keyboard, typing commands even as tears streamed down her face. The decryption program shifted focus, following the pattern she'd recognized in her enhanced memory. Alexander watched in amazement as new data began emerging. Not just research notes, but evidence. Names, dates, records of secret meetings, proof of technology suppression going back decades. The interface was working better than they'd ever imagined, combining their neural patterns to unlock not just data, but understanding. Through their shared connection, Alexander began to grasp the full scope of what Project Silicon Crown really was, a systematic effort to control the development and distribution of revolutionary technologies, ensuring they remained in the hands of a select few. But just as they were reaching the core of the encryption, alarms began blaring throughout the building. Dr. Rodriguez's face went pale as she looked at her phone. "Security breach," she said. "Multiple unauthorized entries detected. They're heading this way." Sarah's hands moved quickly. "It's too soon. We need more time." Alexander made a split-second decision. "Emily," he said to Dr. Rodriguez, "initiate the official trials. Get the press in here now. We need witnesses." As Dr. Rodriguez rushed to make it happen, Alexander turned to Sarah. "Whatever happens next," he signed, "remember that I love you." Sarah's eyes widened at his declaration, and in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The neural interface registered a spike in activity, and Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her throat. As security footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, she opened her mouth and whispered her first words in 5 years. "I love you too." The door burst open, but they were ready. The truth they had uncovered was already spreading. Through hidden channels, and the love they had found would give them the strength for what was to come. The real test was just beginning. The Wagner-Tech testing facility had transformed into a media circus. Camera crews jostled for position as Silicon Valley's elite filed into the observation room. Sarah and Alexander remained connected to the neural interface, their shared connection now serving as both shield and weapon against what was coming. Richard Wagner burst through the doors, flanked by members of Wagner-Tech's board of directors. His face went ashen when he saw his son and Sarah, their neural patterns dancing across the screens behind them. "Stop this immediately," he commanded. "This technology hasn't been properly vetted. It's dangerous." But Alexander stood his ground, addressing the gathered crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, you're about to witness something extraordinary. The Bridge Initiative isn't just about assistive technology. It's about truth, about transparency, about giving voice to those who have been silenced." Sarah squeezed his hand, drawing strength from their connection. Through the neural interface, They could feel each other's determination, their shared resolve making them stronger. The prototype was still processing her father's encrypted data in the background, protected by layers of code that only they could access. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, her professional demeanor unshakable. "We have a group of volunteer patients ready to demonstrate the interface's primary function, helping those with communication disabilities. Shall we proceed with the trials as planned?" The press leaned forward eagerly, cameras rolling. Richard Wagner and his associates could only watch, trapped by the public attention they'd hoped to avoid. Any attempt to shut down the demonstration now would raise too many questions. The first volunteer was a young girl who hadn't spoken since a traumatic accident. As the interface synchronized with her neural patterns, her eyes lit up with wonder. Within minutes, she was communicating through the system, her thoughts appearing as text on the screens. But it was what happened next that changed everything. Sarah stood up, still wearing her interface. Her voice, though soft, carried clearly through the sudden silence. "I was like her, trapped in silence, afraid." She paused, gathering strength. But silence doesn't mean powerlessness. Sometimes it means waiting for the right moment to speak. The reporters erupted in questions, but Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "5 years ago, my family's company was working on technology that would have democratized access to information, technology that would have made it impossible for powerful people to hide the truth. They tried to steal it, to bury it, to silence anyone who knew about it." Alexander moved to stand beside her, their neural patterns synchronizing even more deeply through the interface. On the screens behind them, data began appearing. Fragments of James Chen's research, records of secret meetings, evidence of systematic suppression of revolutionary technologies. "Project Silicon Crown," Alexander announced, his voice ringing with authority. "A consortium of tech industry leaders who've been controlling which innovations see the light of day, who've been deciding what truths the world is ready for. Well, we're deciding that the world is ready for all of it." Richard Wagner stepped forward, his face a mask of desperation. "You don't understand what you're doing. The system exists for a reason. Some technologies, some truths, they destabilize everything we've built." "You mean everything you've stolen?" Sarah replied, her recovered voice carrying years of quiet strength. "My father trusted you. He believed in using technology to empower people, not control them." Through their neural connection, Sarah and Alexander could feel the decryption program nearing completion. But they could also sense something else. Other minds beginning to connect through the interface. The volunteer patients, still wearing their prototypes, were being drawn into the shared consciousness they'd created. Dr. Rodriguez's eyes widened as she monitored the readings. "It's extraordinary," she breathed. "The interface, it's creating a network of shared truth. Every person connected can see the evidence, feel the truth of it." As the gathered crowd watched in amazement, the screens filled with interweaving patterns of thought and memory. The volunteers began sharing their own stories of encountering Project Silicon Crown's influence. Innovations buried, research defunded, careers quietly ended. Richard Wagner and his associates began backing toward the door, but security guards, Alexander's security team, blocked their exit. "The police are on their way," Alexander announced, along with representatives from the SEC, the FBI's cybercrime division, and several very interested congressional committees. "Everything that's been shared here today has already been transmitted to secure servers worldwide." Sarah's voice, growing stronger by the moment, carried an edge of triumph. "You tried to silence us because you were afraid of what would happen if people could truly communicate, truly share knowledge. Well, now everyone will know what you tried to hide." The neural interface hummed with energy as more minds joined the network, each adding their own piece to the puzzle. Sarah and Alexander stood at the center of it all, their love and shared purpose creating a beacon that others could follow. But even as they celebrated this victory, Sarah felt a tremor of warning through their connection. Something was happening. In the deeper layers of the quantum encryption, something her father had hidden so well that even she hadn't known about it. A final truth was about to emerge, one that would test their love and trust in ways they couldn't imagine. In the chaos that followed the public revelation, Sarah and Alexander remained connected through the neural interface, their shared consciousness becoming a calm center in the storm. The testing facility had transformed into a command center, with federal agents taking statements from board members, while reporters broadcast live updates to a world hungry for the truth. But in the secure server room below, Sarah and Alexander made another discovery. As the final layers of quantum encryption fell away, a video file emerged, James Chen's last message to his daughter. Sarah's hands trembled as she initiated playback, Alexander's steady presence beside her providing the strength she needed. Her father's face appeared on the screen, looking tired but determined. "Sarah, if you're seeing this, it means you've not only survived but thrived. I always knew your brilliant mind would find a way to unlock this message. What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but you need to know the whole truth." The message revealed that Project Silicon Crown hadn't started as a conspiracy to suppress technology. It had begun 20 years ago as a collaboration between James Chen and Richard Wagner, a genuine attempt to guide technological development responsibly. But power had corrupted the project's original purpose, turning it into a tool for control rather than protection. "Richard wasn't just my business partner," James continued. "He was my friend. We created the neural interface technology together, dreaming of a world where people could truly understand each other. But when we discovered it could also detect deception at a neural level, everything changed. The power to know absolute truth. It frightened people who had built their empires on carefully constructed lies." Through their connected interface, Alexander could feel Sarah's emotional turmoil as she processed this revelation. Her father hadn't been just a victim. He'd been one of the original architects of the system that had ultimately turned against him. "Your mother and I knew they would come for us," James continued, "but we had a plan. The technology they wanted to suppress, we didn't just hide it. We gave it to you, Sarah. Not in the locket, that was only the key. We encoded it into your neural patterns themselves, using a prototype of the interface. Every time you wrote code, every algorithm you developed, you were unconsciously working from the template we planted in your mind." Sarah gasped, her recovered voice catching in her throat. Alexander squeezed her hand as the implications became clear. She hadn't just recreated her father's work. She'd improved it, evolved it, guided by patterns she'd carried within her all along. "The interface you've built," James said, pride evident in his voice, "it's what we always dreamed of, not a tool for control, but a bridge between minds and hearts. The silence you endured, it protected you, kept you from revealing the truth until you were ready, until you found someone you could trust completely." The video message ended with a string of code, the final key needed to unlock the interface's full potential. As Sarah input the sequence, the neural network began to evolve, expanding beyond simple communication to something far more profound. Dr. Rodriguez burst into the room, her face flushed with excitement. "The patients upstairs, something amazing is happening. The interface isn't just letting them communicate, it's helping them heal. Trauma patterns are being rewritten, neural pathways reconstructed. It's like their minds are learning from each other, supporting each other's recovery." Sarah turned to Alexander, her voice still soft but steady. "This is what my father meant. The interface isn't about exposing lies, it's about sharing truth, about helping people understand each other so deeply that deception becomes impossible." Through their connected minds, Alexander shared a memory with her, his childhood self, watching his father grow distant as Project Silicon Crown consumed him. "We can't undo the past," he said gently, "but we can build a better future, together." The neural network continued to expand throughout Wagner Tech's systems, but now it carried something more than just data and evidence. It carried hope, understanding, and the possibility of healing. Every person who connected to the interface became part of a growing community of shared consciousness, each mind adding its own unique perspective to the whole. Richard Wagner, watching from custody as the network grew, finally understood what his old friend had created. Not a weapon of truth to be feared, but a bridge between hearts and minds that could heal the very divisions he had helped create. As federal agents continued gathering evidence and reporters broadcasted the unfolding story, Sarah and Alexander began planning their next steps. The interface technology would need careful development, ethical guidelines, protection from those who might still try to misuse it. But for now, in the quiet of the server room, they simply held each other, their connected minds sharing a vision of the future, one where technology served not to control or divide, but to unite and heal. The silence that had protected Sarah's secret had been transformed into a symphony of shared understanding, and their love had become the first bridge in a network that would change the world. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity at Wagner Tech. The neural interface had become the biggest story in tech history, with implications that reached far beyond Silicon Valley. Sarah and Alexander worked tirelessly, supervising the network's growth while ensuring it remained secure and ethical. The medical community was particularly excited about the interface's healing potential. Dr. Rodriguez had documented dozens of cases where trauma survivors connected to the network showed remarkable recovery progress. Sarah's own voice grew stronger each day, though she still preferred sign language for complex discussions, a choice now rather than a necessity. One morning, as they reviewed data in their private lab, Sarah received an unexpected alert. Someone was trying to access the network using neural patterns that matched her family's encryption. Her hands flew across the keyboard, tracing the signal to its source. "Alexander," she called, her voice catching with emotion. "It's my mother." Through their connected interface, Alexander felt the surge of hope and fear that coursed through Sarah. Eleanor Chen had been missing since that terrible night 5 years. Hagjo presumed gone like the rest of Sarah's family. But now, somewhere in Silicon Valley, she was alive and reaching out through the very technology her husband had helped create. The signal was coming from a private medical facility in Palo Alto. Within hours, Sarah and Alexander were there, accompanied by Dr. Rodriguez and a small security team. They found Elena Chen in a secured wing, recovering from years of being kept in a medically induced state by people who feared what she might reveal. The reunion between mother and daughter transcended words, as they embraced their neural patterns, synchronized through the interface Sarah wore, allowing them to share 5 years of separation in moments of pure emotional connection. Alexander watched through his own interface, feeling honored to witness such a profound moment of healing. Elena's recovery had begun when news of the Bridge initiative reached her doctors. The neural patterns broadcast during the public demonstration had triggered something in her consciousness, helping her fight her way back to awareness. Now connected to the interface, she could share what she knew about the night everything had changed. "Your father," she told Sarah, her voice weak but determined. He knew they were coming. He split his research into 3 parts: the core, technology in your neural patterns, the encryption key in the locket, and a final failsafe that he entrusted to me. He believed that only when all 3 came together in the right way, with the right intentions, could the technology be safely released to the world. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized the implications. The network's current form, it's not complete, is it? Elena shook her head. What you've built is beautiful, Sarah. It's already helping so many people. But your father designed the failsafe to unlock something even more revolutionary. He called it the bridge to understanding, a way for the interface to not just facilitate communication and healing, but to actively promote empathy and connection across all human barriers. Alexander leaned forward, intrigued. How is that different from what the network already does? The current network requires active participation, Elena explained. People must choose to connect, to share, to understand. The complete version would create a field of ambient empathy, a subtle but persistent reminder of our shared humanity that would affect everyone within range, even those not directly connected to the interface. Through their neural connection, Sarah and Alexander grappled with the implications. Such technology could transform society itself, breaking down barriers of hatred and misunderstanding that had plagued humanity for millennia. But it would also represent an unprecedented influence on human consciousness. Your father struggled with this, Eleanor continued, reaching for her daughter's hand. He believed humanity needed this push toward empathy and understanding, but he wanted to ensure it couldn't be misused. That's why he split it up, why he encoded it in ways that required not just technical brilliance, but emotional wisdom to unlock. Sarah's voice trembled as she asked the critical question, how do we access the failsafe? It's not about accessing. Eleanor smiled, touching her daughter's face. It's about becoming. The failsafe isn't a piece of code or a key. It's a state of being, a perfect balance of technical understanding and emotional truth. You've been moving toward it ever since you found your voice again, Sarah. Ever since you and Alexander proved that love could bridge any distance, heal any wound. As if in response to Elena's words, the neural interface began picking up new patterns, harmonics they hadn't seen before, possibilities that existed in the spaces between thought and feeling. Through their connected consciousness, Sarah and Alexander could sense the network evolving, responding to this new understanding. Dr. Rodriguez burst into the room, her tablet displaying streams of data. Something's happening across the entire network. The neural patterns are shifting, becoming more complex, more interconnected. It's as if the network itself is learning to love, Sarah finished, her voice full of wonder. She turned to Alexander, their shared consciousness buzzing with potential. This is what my father was working toward. Not just a bridge between minds, but a bridge between hearts. As the network continued to evolve around them, Sarah, Alexander, and Eleanor held hands, their neural patterns synchronizing in a dance of healing and hope. The true power of the Bridge Initiative was finally emerging, and with it, the promise of a world where understanding could triumph over fear, where love could heal even the deepest wounds. But in the depths of Silicon Valley's power structure, not everyone welcomed this evolution. As the network grew stronger, those who had built their empires on division and control were preparing for one final attempt to stop what was coming. The greatest test of Sarah and Alexander's love and of humanity's readiness for true connection was about to begin. The Wagner Tech campus buzzed with anticipation as final preparations were made for the global launch of the completed Bridge Initiative. In the week since Elena's revelation, Sarah and Alexander had worked with their team to integrate the fail-safe protocols, testing and refining the network's enhanced empathic capabilities. The transformation was already visible in their test. Groups, people from vastly different backgrounds who once could barely communicate now found themselves sharing deep understanding and connection. The ambient empathy field, even at low power, created subtle but profound changes in how people related to each other, but not everyone welcomed these changes. The morning of the launch, Sarah and Alexander received an urgent message from their security team. Several major tech companies had filed last-minute injunctions, claiming the Bridge Initiative's empathy field violated personal autonomy. Behind the scenes, pressure was being applied to government regulators, investors, and media outlets. "They're afraid," Sarah signed to Alexander, her voice still reserved for moments of deep emotion. Through their neural link, he could feel her determination. Not of the technology, but of what it represents. A world where lies and manipulation lose their power. Alexander nodded, drawing her close. "Then we show them there's nothing to fear. We prove that understanding is stronger than control." The launch event was set up in Wagner Tech's main auditorium, with satellite locations around the world ready to connect to the network simultaneously. Elena Chen, growing stronger each day, sat in the front row beside Dr. Rodriguez, both women radiating pride and hope. As Sarah stepped onto the stage, her neural interface gleaming softly, she felt hundreds of minds ready to connect, waiting for the moment when the bridge would open fully for the first time. Alexander stood beside her, their patterns synchronized, in perfect harmony. "5 years ago," Sarah began, her voice clear and strong, "I lost my voice because I couldn't bear the weight of what I'd seen. I thought silence would protect me, would keep the truth safe until it was time. What I didn't realize was that the greatest truth isn't something you hide, it's something you share." She gestured to the screens behind her, where the network's neural patterns danced in complex, beautiful formations. The Bridge Initiative isn't just about communication or healing, though it does both. It's about recognition, recognizing the humanity in each other, the shared hopes and fears that connect us all. Alexander stepped forward, taking her hand. "We've been taught to see our differences as barriers, to build walls between us. But what if those very differences are bridges waiting to be built? What if understanding isn't something we find, but something we create together? As they spoke, the network began to pulse with new energy. Around the world, test sites reported successful connections, the empathy field spreading in gentle waves. In the auditorium, people gasped as they felt the first subtle touch of enhanced awareness. Not an invasion of privacy, but a soft reminder of shared humanity. Suddenly, the screens flickered. Warning alerts flashed across the network monitors. As multiple systems detected unauthorized access attempts, someone was trying to shut down the network, using advanced algorithms to attack its core protocols. Sarah's hands flew across her control panel, her mind deep in the network's defense systems. Through their connection, Alexander could feel her surprise turn to understanding. "It's not an attack," she signed quickly. "It's an invitation." The hackers weren't trying to destroy the network. They were reaching out through it, using their own modified versions of the interface technology. They were the hidden ones, the people who had been working in secret for years to protect and develop similar technologies. Sarah made a bold decision. Instead of blocking their access, she opened the network wider, creating space for these new minds to join. The neural patterns shifted and grew, incorporating these new perspectives, these different approaches to connection and understanding. The result was beyond anything they had imagined. The network didn't just grow, it transformed, becoming something greater than the sum of its parts. The empathy field deepened, enriched by the diversity of experiences and approaches now flowing through it. In the auditorium, tears flowed freely as people felt the full power of true connection. Barriers of language, culture, and ideology began to dissolve, replaced by a profound sense of shared purpose. The very people who had tried to stop the launch found themselves caught up in the wave of understanding, their fears transformed into hope. Alexander watched in awe as Sarah coordinated this vast symphony of minds, her recovered voice carrying the emotion they all felt. "This is what my father dreamed of. Not a technology to control, but a gift to share. A bridge that anyone can cross, carrying only their truth and their willingness to understand." The Bridge Initiative had become more than a network, more than a technology. It had become a movement, a transformation, a new way of being human together. As Sarah and Alexander stood on stage, their love visible in every synchronized neural pattern, they knew they had created something that would change the world forever. But even as they celebrated this triumph, they could feel the network showing them glimpses of what was yet to come. The bridge was still growing, still evolving, promising even greater possibilities for connection and understanding. Their journey wasn't ending, it was just beginning. 1 month after the global launch of the Bridge Initiative, Sarah stood at the window of her office in Wagner Tech's newly established Center for Human Connection. The view of Silicon Valley below had changed subtly, but significantly. People moved, differently now, more aware of each other, more connected. The ambient empathy field had become as much a part of daily life as smartphones had once been. The door opened quietly, and Alexander entered, his neural interface synchronizing automatically with hers. These days, they kept their connection, at a gentle background level, like holding hands while going about their day. But now she felt his excitement bubbling through their link. "They're ready," he signed, though his voice would have worked just as well. Like many others, they had discovered that sign language added a beautiful layer of expression to their communication, even after Sarah's voice had fully returned. In the main conference room, Elena Chen waited with Richard Wagner. The two older adults had spent the past month working together, using the neural interface to heal old wounds and understand each other's perspectives. Richard's face bore the peaceful look of someone who had finally found forgiveness, both from others and from himself. "The President's office just confirmed," Richard announced as Sarah and Alexander entered. "The Bridge Initiative has been officially recognized as a fundamental human right. No corporation or government can restrict access to the network or its empathy field." Sarah felt tears of joy forming. "Dad would have loved this," she said softly, feeling her mother's warm agreement through their connected interfaces. But there was more news to share. Dr. Rodriguez burst into the room, her usually calm demeanor bubbling with excitement. "The medical results are incredible," she announced, spreading holographic charts in the air between them. "The network's healing capabilities have exceeded our wildest expectations. Trauma recovery rates are up 300%. Communication disorders are being overcome at unprecedented rates. And the empathy field's effect on social behavior patterns—" She paused, grinning. "Well, let's just say the psychology textbooks are being rewritten." Through their enhanced connection, Sarah could feel Alexander's pride and love washing over her. Together, they had transformed his company from a traditional tech giant into something entirely new, a center for human growth and connection. The interface had evolved far beyond its original design. People discovered they could share not just thoughts and feelings, but skills and understanding. A doctor in New York could guide a surgeon in rural Africa through a complex procedure. A grandmother in Beijing could share her life experiences directly with her grandchildren in Sydney. Artists found entirely new forms of expression, creating works that could be experienced on neural and emotional levels. But perhaps most remarkably, the network had begun showing signs of emergent behavior. Not artificial intelligence in the traditional sense, but something new, a kind of collective consciousness that arose from the combined insights and emotions of millions of connected minds. "The network's latest scans are fascinating," Elena explained, pulling up her own data. "When people connect deeply through the interface, their neural patterns create harmonic resonances we've never seen before. It's as if humanity is learning a new way to think, to feel, to be." Sarah moved to the window again, looking out at the valley where her journey had begun. "Remember that first day?" She signed to Alexander, who came to stand beside her. "When you found me with my little sign, asking for a chance?" He wrapped his arms around her, their neural patterns dancing together in the way that had become as natural as breathing. "I remember thinking you looked too dignified to be standing on that corner, like a princess in disguise. More like a programmer in hiding," she laughed, but then grew serious. "Did you ever imagine it would lead to this?" Through their connection, they shared memories of the past months, the revelations about Project Silicon Crown, the discovery of Elena, the global launch that had changed everything. But more than that, they shared their vision of the future, a world where understanding bridged every divide, where technology served to connect rather than control. Richard approached them, his own interface glowing softly. "James would be proud," he said quietly, "not just of what you've built, but of how you built it. With love, with wisdom, with respect for human dignity." Eleanor joined them at the window, and for a moment, the four of them stood connected through the interface, their minds and hearts aligned in shared purpose. The network hummed around them, carrying millions of similar connections across the globe. A notification popped up in their shared visual field. The first results from the Bridge Initiative's educational program were coming in. Schools that had integrated the network were reporting unprecedented improvements in empathy, understanding, and collaborative learning. Children who had struggled with traditional education were flourishing in an environment where understanding could be shared directly. But even as they celebrated these successes, Sarah and Alexander knew their work was just beginning. The network was showing them new possibilities every day, new ways to bridge the gaps between hearts and minds. And somewhere in that vast web of connection, they could sense something extraordinary taking shape. A future where humanity's greatest strength would be its ability to understand, to share, to love. As the sun set over Silicon Valley, casting long shadows between the buildings where tech empires had once ruled through division and control, Sarah and Alexander stood united, their love now part of something far greater than themselves. Through the network they had built, they could feel the pulse of a world learning to connect in ways their ancestors could only have dreamed of. The silence that had once protected Sarah's secrets had transformed into a symphony of shared understanding, and the bridge they had built together was leading humanity toward a future full of possibilities they were only beginning to imagine. The grand ballroom of the San Francisco Symphony Hall sparkled with elegance as the tech industry's brightest stars gathered for the first annual Bridge Initiative Humanitarian Awards. 1 year had passed since the network's global launch, and the world had transformed in ways that even Sarah and Alexander hadn't anticipated. Sarah stood backstage, adjusting the neural interface that had become as much a fashion statement as a technological tool. Designer versions now graced magazine covers, but she preferred her original prototype, modified only slightly for comfort. Alexander appeared beside her, handsome in his tuxedo, their interfaces synchronizing with a familiar warmth. "Ready?" he asked, both verbally and through their connection. The depth of his love flowed through their link, as strong as ever, but now seasoned with a year of shared triumphs and challenges. Sarah nodded, taking his hand. "Ready to change the world again?" They stepped onto the stage together, greeted by thunderous applause. The audience was a testament to how far they'd come. Tech executives sat beside artists, scientists next to spiritual leaders, all connected through the network that had broken down the old barriers between different worlds. "A year ago," Sarah began, her voice clear and strong, "I stood before you unable to speak, carrying secrets that had silenced me. Today, I stand here surrounded by a world that has learned to listen, not just with ears, but with hearts and minds." The holographic displays behind them came to life, showing the network's global impact. Cities where crime rates had plummeted as the empathy field helped people understand each other's struggles. Schools where bullying had become nearly non-existent. Hospitals where patients healed faster through shared neural support. The Bridge Initiative was never about technology, Alexander continued, his hand clasped with Sarah's. It was about possibility. The possibility that we could understand each other deeply enough to heal our oldest wounds, to solve our greatest challenges together. Eleanor Chen and Richard Wagner sat in the front row, both now active leaders in the initiative's ethics committee. Through the network, Sarah could feel their pride and contentment, former adversaries transformed into partners in protecting humanity's new connection. Dr. Rodriguez took the stage next, presenting the latest research results. The network's healing capabilities had expanded beyond individual trauma to address societal wounds. Communities torn apart by historical conflicts were finding ways to understand and forgive. Environmental initiatives were gaining unprecedented support as people directly experienced their connection to the natural world through the network. But perhaps the most extraordinary development, Dr. Rodriguez announced, has been the emergence of what we're calling collective innovation. When minds connect deeply through the network, they're capable of insights that no individual could achieve alone. We're seeing breakthroughs in everything from clean energy to space exploration, all driven by humanity's new ability to think and create together. Sarah stepped forward again, her voice carrying the weight of personal truth. "My father believed that technology should serve humanity's highest potential. He dreamed of a world where understanding would triumph over fear, where connection would be stronger than control. Today, we're not just honoring that dream, we're living it." The ceremony continued with awards presented to individuals and organizations who had used the network in extraordinary ways. A teacher who had revolutionized education for autistic children. A peace negotiator who had resolved a century-old conflict. A group of scientists who had made breakthrough discoveries in consciousness research. But the most moving moment came when Sarah and Alexander announced the James Chen Foundation, dedicated to ensuring universal access to the network. "No one should be denied the opportunity to connect, to understand, to grow," Alexander declared. "The Bridge Initiative belongs to all of humanity." As the evening drew to a close, Sarah and Alexander stood on the Symphony Hall's balcony, looking out over the city they had helped transform. Through their neural connection, they shared not just this moment, but their dreams for the future. "I've been working on something," Sarah signed, her excitement bubbling through their link. "A way to extend the network's capabilities even further, not just connecting minds, but helping us connect with the world itself. Imagine being able to feel the Earth's rhythms, to understand the deep patterns of nature." Alexander's eyes lit up with understanding. "The next bridge to build." "One of many," she smiled, leaning into his embrace. Through their connection, they could feel the network humming with millions of similar moments of intimacy and understanding happening around the world. The silence that had once imprisoned Sarah had become a gateway to humanity's greatest symphony, the harmony of hearts and minds united in purpose. As they stood there, Sarah touched her throat gently, remembering the long journey from silence to voice, from isolation to connection. But it wasn't just her voice that had been restored. It was humanity's ability to speak its deepest truths, to share its greatest dreams. The network pulsed with possibility, showing them glimpses of what was yet to come. New bridges waiting to be built, new understandings waiting to be reached, new ways of being human together. And at the heart of it all was the simple truth that had started everything. The power of love to bridge any distance, heal any wound, and transform silence into song. Sarah and Alexander's love story had become more than just their own. It had become a bridge that helped humanity cross from one era into another, from separation to connection, from fear to understanding. As they held each other under the stars, their neural patterns dancing in perfect harmony, they knew that this was just the beginning of humanity's greatest adventure, the journey toward true understanding. The future stretched before them, full of endless possibilities, and they were ready to face it together, building bridges across every divide, one connection at a time.